burning wars of the roses. As we continue with Part 20, The Rites of Freemasonry, from the Freemason's Manual, or Illustrations of Masonry by Jeremiah Howe. Chapter 20, The Rites of Freemasonry. What I understand I find to be excellent, and therefore believe that to be of equal value which I cannot understand. Socrates. It is not perhaps generally known to English Masons, and more particularly to the younger members of the craft, that in modern times numerous modifications have been introduced, or rather interpolated, in the glorious fabric of Freemasonry, embodying a variety of degrees, the ceremonials of which greatly resemble one another and have similar designations. These have nearly all originated on the continent of Europe and have been concocted, some for political and some for religious influence, and to all of them is affixed the solemn appellation of rite. We believe we are correct in saying that in all these the three ancient degrees and their essentials were preserved. Most of these novelties originated in the vanity of their contrivers, ambitious of making themselves a name. Some fell into oblivion in the inventor's lifetime, others died out with their authors, and nearly all are now extinct. At the present time, the Masonic family in England may be considered as divided into four distinct bodies, in which we have four several constitutions acknowledged, viz. the United Grand Lodge, the Supreme Council of the Ancient and Accepted Rite, the Grand Conclave of Knights Templar, and the Grand Lodge of Mark Masters, besides the schism, if we may so term it, of the Baldwin encampment of Templars, claiming the same prerogatives as the Supreme Council and Grand Conclave. Seeing the position of Masonry in this island, it does appear surprising that we can number little more than 40 of these varieties of Masonic government on the great continent of Europe. We believe that a brother who has been admitted into a degree of any rite is always received and acknowledged in a degree of like name or rank in any lodge or assembly practicing under the constitution of another rite. York Rite. The York Rite, the most ancient, has existed from time immemorial and originated in the city of York, where the first Grand Lodge of England was held in the year 926. In this, the parent lodge of pure masonry, it is said only the three primitive degrees of ancient craft masonry were in the first instance acknowledged. To them, in modern times, have been added four other degrees, viz. Mark Master, Past Master, Most Excellent Master, and the supreme degree of the Holy Royal Arch. Thus, this rite consists of 7 degrees, but in some parts of the United States, where it is still practiced, 2 have been annexed in addition, those of Royal and Select Master. But as mentioned in the account of the ancient and accepted rite, the ancient York Masons in England in the last century practiced other degrees. This rite is not at present practiced in this country, but as the most ancient Masonic institution in the British Isles, and it appears of all those we are about to describe, it is entitled to priority. From this arose the English Rite. The English Rite, or that adopted by the United Grand Lodge of England and Wales. The Solemn Act of Union in 1813 declared and pronounced that pure ancient masonry consists of 3 degrees and no more, viz. those of the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master mason, including the supreme degree of the Holy Royal Arch. Notwithstanding this, we consider the Masonic fabric really to consist of 9 degrees, which are these: 1. Entered apprentice. 2. Fellow craft. 3. Master mason. 4. Royal Arch. 5. Installed master or past master. 6. Joshua or third principle. 7. Haggai or second principle. 8. Zerubbabel or first principle. 9. Past principle. Now, if the word degree be correctly defined by Johnson and other lexicographers to be a step or preparation for another step, a high state, station, rank, it is worthy of remark that to qualify a brother for permanent admission to membership of the Grand Lodge and Grand Chapter, each and all the steps above enumerated must be taken, and as to each is attached distinct signs and secrets, they must, in the common acceptation of the word, be degrees. Hence, although our nomenclature may differ from that adopted by our transatlantic brethren in the York Rite, in the number of degrees 9, they correspond. Ancient and Accepted Rite. The history of the Ancient and Accepted Rite has already been so fully treated upon that no further explanation is needed. The exact date at which it was formed is uncertain, but as it is the most extensively diffused of those rites in which the historical and chivalric degrees are embodied, we give it the next place in rank. Chapter of Clermont. In the year 1753, in the Jesuit College of the city of Clermont in France, in defiance of the bull of Pope Clement XII, as well as the denunciation of the King of France, the brethren of that college founded a Masonic lodge to which they gave the name of the Chapter of Clermont. All that is distinctly known of this society or its teaching is that, besides the three ancient symbolic degrees, there were introduced some of the higher ones, all the allegories and symbols of which Fessler asserts pointed to the establishment of a universal dominion, the desired end and aim of the Jesuit institution. Into this chapter, the famous Baron Hunde, though a member of the Protestant faith, contrived to gain admission, and upon the Masonic instruction he there received and the ritual of the new degrees, was formed the nucleus of the system which he introduced into Germany. Strict observance. The rite of strict observance was founded in Germany by the Baron Hunde in 1764, and according to Clavel is based on the Order of the Knights Templar. It comprises 7 degrees, viz. Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason, Scotch Master, Novice, Templar, and Professed Knight. The legend of the rite thus narrates its origin. On the murder of Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Templars, Pierre d'Aumont, Grand Prior of Auvergne, with 2 commanders and 5 knights, escaped from France and sought safety in Scotland under the disguise of operative Masons. Soon after their arrival, they were so fortunate as to discover one George Harris, a Grand Commander with some other Templars. A chapter of all the knights was held on St. John's Day, 1313, and Pierre d'Aumont was elected Grand Master. To avoid the persecution which still pursued their own body, they met as a lodge of Freemasons, that order being tolerated at the period of the Templar persecution. In 1361, the chief seat of the order was established at Old Aberdeen, and under the veil of Masonry in this rite, the Templar order was diffused from Scotland to various parts of the continent. Some of the degrees embody the practice of alchemy, magic, and other now obsolete pseudo-scientific delusions. We have no knowledge of this rite being now anywhere practiced. The rite, nevertheless, attained considerable influence at one period, proof of which is found in the schism that was created among its members and resulted in an order called the Clerks of Relaxed Observance, which Offset claimed preeminence, not only over the parent rite, but over the whole brotherhood of Masons. For admission into this association, it was imperative that the candidate should be a member of the Catholic Church of Rome, and that he should have taken all the degrees of the rite of strict observance. The new rite had 10 degrees. Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason, African Brother, Knight of St. Andrew, Knight of the Eagle, Scotch Master, Sovereign Magus, Provincial Master of the Red Cross, and Knight of Light. The last degree was divided into 5 sections, and it required 7 years for completion. Alchemy and magic were the objects of this rite. Clavel says its members boasted that they had possession of the true philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, the command of spirits, and a method of discovering the hidden treasures of the temple. Rite of perfection. The rite of perfection. We have already referred to the rite denominated Chapter of Clermont. The Chevalier de Bonneville is said to have taken a prominent part in its establishment about the year 1753 to 1756 to do honor to Louis of Bourbon, Prince of Clermont, who was at that period the Grand Master of the Freemasons of France. The leading principle in this rite is to establish the connection of the Knights Templar with Freemasonry. It bore also the name of the Rite of Herodom and consisted of 25 degrees, most of them being the same as those of the ancient and accepted rite. 1. Entered Apprentice. 2. Fellow Craft. 3. Master Mason. 4. Secret Master. 5. Perfect Master. 6. Intimate Secretary. 7. Intendant of Buildings. 8. Provost and Judge. 9. Elect of 9. 10. Elect of 15. 11. Illustrious Elect. 12. Chief of the 12 Tribes. 13. Royal Arch. 14. Grand Elect. Perfect Ancient Master. 15. Knight of the Sword. 16. Prince of Jerusalem. 17. Knight of the East and West. 18. Rose Croix Knight. 19. Grand Pontiff. 20. Grand Patriarch. 21. Grand Master Master of the Key of Masonry, 22, Prince of Libanus, 23, Sovereign Prince Adept, Chief of the Grand Consistory, 24, Illustrious Knight, Commander of the Black and White Eagle, 25, Most Illustrious Sovereign Prince of Masonry, Grand Knight, Sublime Commander of the Royal Secret. This rite was in practice a few years since in Paris and possibly is still in existence. It will be seen that the names of some of the degrees which differ from the first formation of the ancient and accepted rite are the same as those adopted by the Supreme Council in England. The primitive Scotch rite was founded on the rite of perfection by Machaut, an advocate at Namur, and is said still to be practiced in that city, but we cannot learn that it was adopted in any other place. There are 33 degrees in this rite, and they are similar to the Scotch rite, but in this the Rose Croix is the 22nd, and the Kadosh the 28th degree. In the historical part of the lecture in this rite, we are told that the masons who were employed in constructing the first temple acquired immortal honor, and the worldwide fame of that stately edifice caused the order to become more uniformly established and regulated than before. Their scrupulousness in admitting new members into the order brought it to a high degree of respect, merit alone being regarded in the admission of candidates. With these principles instilled into their minds, many of the Grand Elect left the temple after its dedication and dispersed themselves among the neighboring kingdoms, instructing all who applied and were found worthy in the sublime degrees of ancient craft masonry. French Rite. The French or modern rite was established by the Grand Orient of France about the year 1786 to preserve the high degrees, and for the purpose of simplifying the system, the number was reduced to 7, viz. Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason Elect or First Order of Rose Croix, Scotch Order or Second Order of Rose Croix, Knight of the East or Third Order of Rose Croix, and the Rose Croix or Ne Plus Ultra. The peculiar signs and secrets of the two first symbolical degrees under this rite are in reverse of those adopted by the Grand Lodge or Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Rite of France, in which the practice is the same as in our own Grand Lodge. In the third degree, the lodge has a very solemn appearance, being hung with black drapery and displaying many somber and awe-inspiring emblems. The master is designated très respectably, very worshipful, and the members venerable masters. All the brethren appear covered. In the fourth degree, there are 3 chambers: the room of preparation, the council chamber, and the cavern. The lesson inculcated in this degree is intended forcibly to imprint on the mind of its recipient the certainty with which punishment will follow crime. The fifth degree requires also 3 chambers, the second of which is most elaborately furnished and decorated with various Masonic attributes. In the east is a triangular pedestal on which is placed the cubical stone. In the center of the chamber is a column, and by it a table having upon it the corn, wine, and oil. And in the north is a sacrificial altar. The lodge is illuminated by 27 lights in 3 groups of 9 each. It represents the temple completed, and its whole appearance is most gorgeous. The lodge is denominated Sublime. The presiding officer is Très Grand, very great, and the brethren are Sublime Masters. In this degree, the passwords correspond with those of our Royal Arch installation. The 6th degree also requires 3 chambers. The second, which is called the Hall of the East, represents the Council of Cyrus at Babylon and is described in somewhat inconsistent terms as being composed of that prince, 7 principal officers, and other knights. The decoration is green and requires many lights. Behind the throne is a transparency representing the vision of Cyrus, in which he received the injunction, "Restore liberty to the captives." The candidate, in passing from the 2nd to the 3rd chamber, has to cross a bridge of timber over a stream choked with corpses and rubbish, and having at length arrived at the last, or western chamber, he perceives the masons reposing among the ruins of Jerusalem. The room is hung with red and illuminated by 10 groups of candles of 7 each. In the center is the representation of the ruined temple. The sovereign master represents Cyrus, the chief officer, Daniel the prophet. The badge is of white satin bordered with green. The sash of water green is worn from left to right. The jewel is the triple triangle crossed by 2 swords. The 7th degree is precisely our own 18th degree. A rite slightly differing from the preceding and called the ancient Reformed Rite, we are told, is now practiced in Holland and Belgium. Elected Cohens. The rite of elected Cohens, or priests, was founded sometime between 1754 and 1760 by Martinez Pachalis, by whom it was introduced into the lodges of Bordeaux, Marseille, and Toulouse. Of its principles, very little is known, but it is said to have been divided into two classes, in the first of which was represented the fall of man from virtue and happiness, and in the second his final restoration. It consisted of 9 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, grand elect, apprentice Cohen, fellow craft Cohen, master Cohen, grand architect, and knight commander. Clavel tells us this rite was rather popular among the littérateurs of Paris for a short time, but it has now ceased to exist. Martinism, the rite of Saint Martin or Martinism, was instituted by the Marquis de Saint-Martin, a disciple of Pascalis, some time after, of whose system it was said to be a reform. There were in this novelty 2 classes embodying 10 degrees. After the 3 first degrees followed the first temple, as it was termed by de Saint-Martin, comprising those of ancient master, elect, grand architect, and master of the secret. The degrees of the second temple were Prince of Jerusalem, Knight of Palestine, and Knight Kadosh. It was first brought out at Lyon, but in time extended to the principal cities of France and Germany. This rite most likely perished when all the continental lodges were closed during the panic produced by the French Revolution. Council of Emperors of the East and West. Under this pompous name was established about 1758 in Paris, an authoritative body, the members of which at first assumed the titles of Sovereign Prince Masters, Substitutes General of the Royal Art, Grand Superintendents and Officers of the Grand and Sovereign Lodge of St. John of Jerusalem. Regan, in his Orthodoxie Magonique, asserts that this is the parent of the ancient and accepted rite, which was established by Frederick II at Berlin in the same year. This rite had 25 degrees, the first 19 being the same as the ancient and accepted rite, the others being Grand Patriarch, Noachite, Key of Masonry, Prince of Lebanon, Knight of the Sun, Kadosh, and Prince of the Royal Secret. In the year in which it was formed, the degrees and their ritual were adopted by the Grand Lodge of the 3 Globes in Berlin. The ancient and accepted rite has superseded the practice of this rite in France and Germany. Elect of Truth. Elect of Truth, or Lodge of Perfect Union, was the name given to a rite adopted in a lodge at Rennes in France, and for a time extended to other cities. It was divided into 3 classes, which contained 14 degrees. The first class comprising the entered apprentice, fellow craft, master and perfect master. The second, the elect of 9, elect of 15, master-elect, minor architect, second architect, grand architect, knight of the East, Rose Croix, and the third class, the knight adept and elect of truth. This rite has ceased to exist. Philosophic Scotch Rite. The Philosophic Scotch Rite was established in Paris and adopted by the Grand Lodge in 1776. Some few years previously, a Mason named Pernetti founded a rite to which he gave the name of Hermetic, or Sublime Masters of the Luminous Ring, the object of the contriver being to instruct his disciples not only in the higher degrees of Masonry, but also in the art of transmuting metals and preparing the elixir of life. Pernetti had for a pupil a physician named Boileau, who did away with the alchemy and made it more purely Masonic, and then gave this reformed rite the name above affixed to it. This rite, which Clavel says is still practiced in France, has 12 degrees, the 3 degrees of ancient craft masonry being necessary prerequisites, though they do not form a part of the rite. The degrees are 1, 2, and 3. Knight of the Black Eagle or Rose Croix, divided into 3 parts. 4. Knight of the Phoenix. 5. Knight of the Sun. 6. Knight of Iris. 7. Freemason. 8. Knight of the Argonauts. 9. Knight of the Golden Fleece. 10. Grand Inspector, Perfect Initiate. 11. Grand Inspector, Grand Scotch Mason. 12. Sublime Master of the Luminous Ring. The doctrine taught in this rite was that Freemasonry was founded by Pythagoras. and the lectures consisted of an explanation of the philosophy and peculiar doctrines of the Samian sage, asserting, for instance, that the symbols he adopted in his secret instruction were chiefly derived from geometry. Thus, the right angle was an emblem of morality and justice. The equilateral triangle was a symbol of God, the essence of light and truth. The square referred to the divine mind. The cube was the symbol of the mind of man after it had been purified by acts of piety and devotion, and thus prepared for mingling with the celestial beings. The point within a circle and the dodecahedron, or figure of 12 sides, were symbols of the universe. The triple triangle was an emblem of health, and the letter Y a representation of the course of human life, in which there were two diverging paths, the one of virtue leading to happiness, and the other of vice, conducting to misery. Pythagoras, in pursuit of knowledge, traveled into Chaldea and Egypt and is said to have been instructed in the sacred lore of the Hebrews, either by the prophet Ezekiel or Daniel. Dr. Oliver asserts that he was initiated into the Jewish system of Freemasonry, and that his mysteries were the most perfect approximation to the original science of Freemasonry, which could be accomplished by a philosopher bereft of the aid of revelation. Jamblichus relates, as evidence of their brotherly love and of their means of mutual recognition, the following incident. A Pythagorean traveling in a distant country fell sick and died at a public inn. Previously, however, to his death, being unable to compensate the landlord for the kindness and attention with which he had been treated, he directed a tablet on which he had traced some enigmatical characters to be exposed on the public road. Sometime after, another disciple of Pythagoras passed that way, perceived the tablet, and learning from the inscription that a brother had been there sick and in distress, and that he had been treated with kindness, he stopped and reimbursed the innkeeper for his trouble and expense. African architects. The Order of African Architects was established by a Prussian named Boucheron with the sanction of Frederick II. It was divided into two temples having 11 degrees. The first temple contained the 3 symbolic degrees. In the second temple were apprentice of Egyptian secrets, initiate in the Egyptian secrets, cosmopolitan brother, Christian philosopher, master of Egyptian secrets, esquire, soldier, knight. The object of the institution was historical research, and the ritual was not confined to Masonry, but contained allusions to the mysteries of Christianity and to the pursuits of alchemy and chivalry. Reagan tells us that the society possessed a large mansion for the grand chapter of the order. This had an extensive library, a museum of natural history, and a perfect chemical laboratory. In their assemblies, they read essays and communicated the results of their researches. They emulated the philosophers of Greece in their simple and decorous banquets at which instructive discourses were delivered, and much affected sententious apothegms whose meaning was sublime but concealed. The society for some years annually decreed a gold medal with the sum of 50 ducats for the best memoir on the history of Masonry. Many of these documents have been published and some are of value. Rite of Philalethes. The Rite of the Philalethes, or Searchers After Truth, which was a compound of the reveries of Swedenborg and Paschalis, is said to have been invented by Salvalet de Lange, keeper of the royal treasury, and was first adopted in the Lodge of Amis Ruinis at Paris about the year 1775. It consisted of 12 degrees, viz. Apprentice, Fellowcraft, Master, Elect, Scotchmaster, Knight of the East, Rose Croix, Knight of the Temple, Unknown Philosopher, Sublime Philosopher, Initiated, and Philalethes, or Searcher After Truth. At the death of the founder of the rite, the Lodge of Amis Ruinis was dissolved, and the rite, not having extended further, ceased to exist. An attempt to revive a rite bearing this name was recently made in London. Illuminati of Avignon. The Illuminati of Avignon was a species of masonry intermingled with the reveries of Swedenborg, somewhere about the year 1760 by Pernetti, who was a Benedictine monk, and the Baron Gabrianka, a Polish nobleman. Very little is known of the institution, and it might have been forgotten but for the Marquis de Thome in 1783, taking up the system that had been adopted in the Avignon Lodge, and from it framing what is now known as Swedenborg's Rite. The Rite of Swedenborg had the 6 grades of Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Theosophite, Illuminated Theosophite, Blue Brother and Red Brother. It is said that this rite is still practiced in some lodges in Sweden. Rossetti, in his essay on the anti-papal spirit of secret societies, asserts that an expert Mason would find much of the institution of Freemasonry in the writings of Swedenborg. But accepting some principles general to Christians as well as Masons, we ourselves have not been able to discover anything to show that Swedenborg was a Freemason. Swedenborg, for 58 years of his life, devoted himself to the cultivation of science and produced a great number of works in which he broached some novel and ingenious theories, one of which consists in applying positive science to all. For instance, one of his rather incomprehensible rules runs thus: the beginning of nature is the same as the beginning of geometry. Thus, natural particles arise from mathematical points precisely as the lines and forms of geometry, and this because everything in nature is geometric. His scientific labors are forgotten, but his theological labors, which occupied the latter part of his life, resulted in the establishment of a sect, or new church, designated by his name, in England, the United States, Sweden, and Germany. He was a most methodical man and laid down these rules for the guidance of his life. 1. Often to read and meditate upon the Word of God. 2. To submit everything to the will of divine providence. 3. To observe in everything a propriety of behavior and always to keep the conscience clear. 4. To discharge with fidelity the functions of his employment and the duties of his office, and to render himself in all things useful to society. The tenets inculcated in his writings and adopted by his followers are: 1. There is one God, that there is in him a divine Trinity, and that he is the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. 2. That having faith consists in believing in him. 3. That evil actions ought not to be done, because they are of the devil and from the devil. 4. That good actions ought to be done because they are of God and from God. 5. And that they should be done by man himself, as of himself, nevertheless under the belief that they are from the Lord, operating in him and by him. This is all very good, but we are led to suppose that it was Swedenborg's reveries concerning angels and celestial visions that were transformed into the rites we have alluded to, and with these, Masonry can have no connection. Rite of Zinzendorf. The Rite of Zinzendorf was a modification of the Illuminism of Avignon, with additions from the Swedenborgian and combining also several selections from the Scotch and other rites. Its promulgator, Count Zinzendorf, was the chief physician to the Emperor Charles VI. The system consisted of 7 degrees divided into 3 sections, the first of which is entitled St. John's Masonry and comprises 1. Entered Apprentice, 2. Fellow Craft, 3. Master Mason. The second section, or Red Masonry, contains the Scotch Apprentice and Fellow Craft and the Scotch Master, while the third, called Capitular Masonry, embraces the favorite of St. John and elected brother. Reformed Rite. The Reformed Rite was an emendation of the Rite of strict observance, rejecting the connection which the latter rite had with the Knights Templar, and was established by an assembly of Masons who met at Wilhelmsbad under Ferdinand, Duke of Brunswick, in the year 1782, assuming in the first instance the title of the Order of Charitable Knights of the Holy City. Monsieur de Saint-Martin's system was merged in this, and Clavel says the lodges that had adopted Martinism adopted the Reformed Rite. Novelties charmed the gay and versatile French, and the rite soon spread over the country. Clavel further states it to be in practice in France and Switzerland. The rite had what were called 5 degrees, but as the last had 3 sections, there were really 7 in all: Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master, Scotch Master, Charitable Knight of the Holy City. The 3 sections of the last were named Novice, Professed Brother, and Knight. Reformed Helvetic Rite. The Reformed Helvetic Rite was the name given to the preceding rite when introduced into Poland in 1784 by Brother Glaire of Lausanne, Minister of State to Stanislaus, King of Poland, who had been the provincial Grand Master of this rite in Switzerland. Clavel says that several alterations were made in the rite and hence the addition to its name. The Grand Orient of Poland adopted it. True Masons. The Order of the True Masons, which was an offshoot of the Hermetic Rite of Pernetti, was formed at Montpellier in France in 1778 by Pernetti's pupil Boileau. This rite had 6 degrees beyond the 3 symbolic degrees of ancient craft masonry, which were essential for admission but not practiced. The degrees were the True Mason in the right way, Knight of the Golden Key, Knight of the Rainbow, Knight of the Argonauts, and Knight of the Golden Fleece. Adoniramite Masonry was a rite established in France shortly before the Revolution. The exact date of its rise and the name of its founder we are unable to learn. It consisted of 12 degrees, of which 4, the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, are peculiar to this rite. The others correspond with those of the same name in the ancient and accepted rite. The degrees are Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason, Perfect Master, Elect of 9, Elect of Perignon, Minor Architect or Scotch Apprentice, Grand Architect or Scotch Fellow Craft, Scotch Master, Knight of the East, Rose Croix Knight, and Prussian Knight. Fessler's Rite. It is well known that during the panic created by the French Revolution, Masonry, as well as most other beneficent institutions, declined, and the lodges were generally closed, and only met occasionally under circumstances of great difficulty. But so soon as order was restored and Masonry began to revive, Professor Fessler, Grand Master of the Grand Lodge Royal York of Friendship at Berlin, revised the statutes and regulated the proceedings of the lodges under his jurisdiction. He also created, or perhaps more properly speaking, selected 9 degrees for this rite. They were Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master, Holy of Holies, Justification, Celebration, Knight of the Passage, Fatherland, and Perfection. The ritual was drawn from the Golden Rose Croix, the Strict Observance, and the Chapter of Clement. Clavel says it was the most abstrusely learned and philosophical of all the degrees in Masonry. It was abandoned with the intention of bringing the ancient York Rite into unison with the constitutions of England. We may here remark that degrees in Prussia are not passed through with the same rapidity as in some other countries, 12 months at least being requisite between each of the symbolic degrees. Rite of Mizraim. The Rite of Mizraim was first promulgated in Italy, we believe at Milan, in 1805, and was said to have been brought from Egypt by a learned philosopher of that country named Ananias. It is said that its founders were some Masons who had been refused admission into the Supreme Council of the Scotch Rite then organized in Milan. It was established in France in 1814 and is continued in some lodges in Paris at the present time. But the Grand Orient of France has never recognized it. It consists of 90 degrees which are divided into 4 series: symbolic, philosophic, mystical, and Kabbalistic, and in each series are 17 classes. The names of the degrees in this more than any other of the rites prove that the founders must have sorely tested their inventive faculties. They appear indeed to have been driven to their wits' end, for the 49th and 50th bear the very expressive titles of Chaos the First and Second, while the 52nd rejoices in the somewhat profane designation of Supreme Commander of the Stars. At the 55th and 56th, the comic element predominates. They are the washer and bellows blower. Many of the degrees pretend to be founded upon and borrowed from the rites of ancient Egypt, but allowing that the rite may have in many degrees an eminently philosophical character, it is altogether too complicated and diffused ever to be practiced. One of its chiefs, Marc Bederide, in 1835 published an elaborate work, exponent of its principles, under the title of De l'Ordre Maconique de Mizraim, from which we learn that the legend of the 3rd degree is abolished in this rite. H.A.B. is said to have returned to his family after the completion of the temple, and to have passed the remainder of his days in peace and opulence. The legend substituted for that, admitted by all the other rites, is carried back to the days of Lamech, whose son Jubal, under the name of Hario Jubal Abe, is reported to have been slain by 3 traitors: Hagaba, Hakima, and Haremda. Grand Lodge of Berlin. The Rite of the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes of Berlin. In his historical landmarks, Brother Oliver says, at this time, about 1775, the increasing innovations, as our account of these varied rites shows, covered pure masonry with disgrace, and with a view of applying a remedy, Lord Petre, the English Grand Master, from 1772 to 1777, entered into a negotiation with the Prince of Hesse-Darmstadt, Grand Master of Germany, which resulted in a mutual compact being formed, which confirmed to the Grand Lodge at Berlin the sole authority in Germany, thus annihilating the strict observance of Baron Hunde. This compact was further confirmed by the King of Prussia, who erected the Grand Lodge at Berlin into a body corporate. The three ancient symbolic degrees are under the control of the Grand Lodge, but the higher degrees, 7 only being practiced, are governed by the internal Supreme Orient, which council is appointed by the Grand Lodge. This rite is not exclusively practiced in Prussia, but also to a very great extent throughout Germany. Persian Rite. The Persian philosophic rite was formed in France about the year 1819. It was not much encouraged and has now ceased to exist. Little is known of its ritual, and whether the three symbolic degrees were essential to its members or whether they are included in the fanciful names of the degrees adopted, we are unable to learn. It consisted of the 7 degrees that follow. 1. Listening apprentice. 2. Fellow craft adept, Esquire of Benevolence. 3. Master Knight of the Sun. 4. Architect of all rights, Knight of the Philosophy of the Heart. 5. Knight of Eclecticism and of Truth. 6. Master Good Shepherd. 7. Venerable Grand Elect. The Temple. At what period the rite of the Order of the Temple was formed, Clavel, from whom we gather our account, does not say, but it appears that its members claim for the institution a regular descent from the Knights Templar. The degrees are evidently borrowed from the Scotch Rite and were originally as follow: Apprentice, Fellow Craft Master, Master of the East, Master of the Black Eagle of St. John, and Perfect Master of the Pelican. But in 1808, as our author says, endeavoring to disguise its evident Masonic origin, it was reorganized, and the degrees, 8 in number, were thus named. 1. Initiate, this is entered apprentice. 2. Initiate of the Interior, this is the Fellow Craft. 3. Adept, this is the Master. 4. Adept of the East, the illustrious elected of 15 of the Scotch Rite. 5. Grand Adept of the Black Eagle of St. John, the elected Knight of 9. These they call the House of Initiation. 6. Postulant of the Orders, Perfect Adept of the Pelican. This is called the House of Postulants and is the Rose Croix of the Scotch Rite. 7. Esquire. 8. Knight or Levite of the Interior Guard. These last degrees are called the Covenant, and are the same as the Knight KH of the Scotch Rite. Order of Charles XII. Although properly it does not directly bear upon the subject we have in hand, still as a solitary instance of the honors paid to distinguished Masons by a sovereign in modern times, we must notice the Order of Charles XII, an order of knighthood instituted by the King of Sweden in 1811, which he intended to be conferred only on the principal dignitaries of the Masonic institution in his dominions. In the manifesto establishing the order, the King decrees, "To give to this, the Masonic Society, a proof of our gracious sentiments towards it, we will and ordain that its first dignitaries, to the number which we may determine, shall in future be decorated with the most intimate proof of our confidence, and which shall be for them a distinctive mark of the highest dignity." The number of knights in the order is 27, all Masons, and the King of Sweden is the perpetual Grand Master. Rite of Memphis. The Rite of Memphis was established in Paris in 1839 by brothers J. Marconis and E. A. Moutet, and extended itself to Marseille and Brussels. It is said to have been a variation of the Rite of Mizraim and was composed of 91 degrees. The Mopses. The Mopses, which name from the German Mops signifies a young mastiff, is intended to indicate the mutual fidelity and attachment of the brethren. those virtues being characteristic of the noble animal. This order originated in the following manner. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a bull condemning and forbidding the practice of the rites of Masonry. Several brethren in the Catholic states of Germany, unwilling to renounce the order, yet fearful of offending the ecclesiastical authority, formed in 1740, under the above name, what was pretended to be a new institution devoted to the papal hierarchy, but which was, in truth, nothing else than Freemasonry, under a less offensive appellation. It was patronized by the most illustrious persons in Germany, and many of the princes of the empire were its grand masters. The Royal Order of Herodom and Rosy Cross, said to have been founded by King Robert Bruce at Kilwinning. After the Battle of Bannockburn on the 24th of June, 1314, the king created the Order of St. Andrew of the Thistle, to which was afterwards united that of Herodom, for the sake of the Masons who formed a part of his troops. The king established the Royal Grand Lodge of Herodom at Kilwinning, reserving to himself and his successors the office of Grand Master. This order is, we believe, entirely confined to Scotland, and is given only to those who, by exaltation or affiliation, are registered in the books of the Grand Chapter of Royal Archmasons. The historical tradition relates that after the dissolution of the Templar Order, several of the knights placed themselves under the protection of Bruce and greatly contributed to gain the victory of Bannockburn. These were the Masons, it is said, for whom he instituted the Order of Herodom. All Masonry declined during the 16th and 17th centuries, and this order was in abeyance until the middle of the last century, when its functions were resumed at Edinburgh. In order to preserve a marked distinction between the Royal Order and Craft Masonry, which had formed a Grand Lodge in that city in 1736, the former confined itself entirely to the 2 degrees of Herodom and Rosy Cross. Dr. Oliver says the Herodom was not originally Masonic, but appears to have been connected with some ceremonies of the early Christians, which are believed to have been introduced by the Culdees, whose principal seat was at Icombe Kill during the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Christian era. The Rosy Cross, which in French was termed the Grade de la Tour, is honorary, the tradition being that it was an order of knighthood, first conferred on the field of Bannockburn. The Swedish Rite, or that practiced by the sanction of the Grand Lodge of Sweden, consists of 12 degrees, the 5th of which, we are told, confers upon its possessor the rank of nobility in the state. The degrees are Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master, Apprentice and Fellow Craft of St. Andrew, Master of St. Andrew, Brother Stewart, Favorite Brother of Solomon, Favorite Brother of St. John or White Ribbon, Favorite Brother of St. Andrew or Violet Ribbon, Member of the Chapter, Dignitary of the Chapter, and Reigning Grand Master. Schroeder's Rite, which is said to be still practiced at Hamburg, was invented by a person of that name, and besides the 3 degrees of ancient craft masonry, had many others containing a mixture of alchemy, magic, and theosophy. It was first practiced in a lodge at Sarreburg. The primitive rite of Narbonne was established in that city in 1780. The degrees were selected from other rites and were chiefly of a philosophical character, assuming as their object the reformation of intellectual man and his restoration to his primitive rank of purity and perfection. The Frères Pontives were a community of operative and speculative Masons who, as a religious house of brotherhood, established themselves at Avignon at the close of the 12th century. They devoted themselves, as the name denotes, to the construction and repair of stone bridges. It is on record that the community existed as late as 1590. John de Medicis, who was master in 1560, may perhaps have been a son of Cosmo, Duke of Florence, who died 1562 and was made a cardinal shortly before. The Order of Mustard Seed, or the Fraternity of Moravian Brothers of the Order of Religious Freemasons, was instituted in Germany in 1739. Its mysteries were founded on the parable in St. Mark's Gospel, where our Lord said, "Whereunto shall we liken the kingdom of God, or with what comparison shall we compare it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when it is sown in the earth is less than all the seeds that be in the earth. But when it is sown, it groweth up, and becometh greater than all herbs, and shooteth out great branches, so that the fowls of the air may lodge under the shadow of it. The description which our Lord has given of the mustard tree occasioned much conjecture, and Lightfoot cites a passage from the Talmud, in which a mustard tree is said to have been possessed of branches sufficiently large to cover a tent, while Scheuchzer describes and represents a species of the plant several feet high and possessing a tree-like appearance. The jewel of the order, suspended from a green ribbon, was a cross of gold surmounted by a mustard plant with the words, "What was it before? Nothing." The brethren wore a ring on which was inscribed, "No one lives for himself." Knight of Malta, as a Masonic grade, was an appendant to that of the Knights Templar, and in this country never existed as a separate degree. It is now disused. Council of the Trinity. It is said in Mackay's lexicon to be an independent Masonic jurisdiction in which are conferred the degrees 1 of Knight of the Christian Mark and Guard of the Conclave, 2 Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, and 3 the Holy and Thrice Illustrious Order of the Holy Cross. They are, as it will be readily seen, all Christian degrees and conferred only on Knights Templar. 1. This degree is said to have been organized by Pope Alexander IV, who authorized the distinguishing attire of the knights to be a red tunic with a white cross, for the defense of his person, selecting for the purpose a body of Knights of St. John. The officers are an invincible knight, senior and junior knights, recorder, treasurer, conductor, and guard. The ritual is composed from passages in the books of Ezekiel and Jeremiah. The jewel is a triangular plate of gold with the letter G within a 5-pointed star. 2. This degree was instituted by St. Helena, the mother of Constantine, in the year 326, when, on her visit to Jerusalem, she is said to have discovered the true cross. During the War of the Crusades, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre were eminent for their valor. Upon the loss of the Holy Land, they took refuge in Perugia, and afterwards were incorporated with the Knights of Rhodes. Curzon, in his visits to the mountains in the Levant, says the order is still continued in Jerusalem, but conferred only on Roman Catholics of noble birth by the superior of the Franciscan College, and that the accolade is bestowed with the sword of Godfrey de Bouillon, which, with his spurs, is preserved in the sacristy of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The presiding officer in America is called the Right Reverend Prelate. The whole ceremonial has reference to death. 3. This, we presume, is the governing council, order of high priesthood. In the old ceremonial of the Royal Arch in England, the government was vested in the 3 chiefs, high priest, king, and prophet, and this form is preserved in the United States. An honorary degree was conferred on the retiring first officer, as we now confer one on the past first principal. When the ritual was performed in ample form, the presence of 9 high priests was required. Rosaic Rite was the name given by its institutor, Miorosa, a Lutheran minister in Germany. It was for a short time highly patronized and exceedingly popular, but was superseded by the rite of strict observance. We have no information as to the ritual or practice. Barth's Rite. At the close of the last century, Barth opened a lodge at Halle in Saxony under the name of the German Union, and succeeded in securing the protection of the Prince of Anhalt-Bernburg and the cooperation of 20 persons of rank. The rite had 6 degrees, viz. The youth, the man, the old man, the mesopolite, the diocesan, and the superior. The Grand Lodge of the State, however, dissolved the fraternity. Knights and Ladies of the Dove. In the year 1784, a secret society of both sexes was framed on the model of Freemasonry. Its meetings were held at Versailles under the title of Chevalier et Chevalière de la Colombe. Its existence, we believe, was of brief duration. The Baron de Nigue, in 1783, established at Frankfurt an order or rite which he called eclectic Masonry, having for its object the abolition of the high grades or philosophical degrees. Hence, eclectic Masonry only acknowledged the 3 symbolic degrees, but permitted any lodge to select at its option any of the higher degrees, provided they did not interfere with the uniformity of the first 3. It is clear the Baron did not succeed in his endeavors, as the degrees he reprobated are in high estimation, and nothing is heard now of his system. Grand Chapter of Haredim. An institution revived, it is supposed, by Brother Preston in 1787. He says, though this order is of ancient date and had been patronized in different parts of Europe, there appears not on record, previously to this period, the regular establishment of such an association in England. For some years it was faintly encouraged, but after its merit had been further investigated, it received the patronage of several exalted Masonic characters. The Grand Chapter is governed by a Grand Patron, 2 Vice Patrons, a Chief Ruler or Herod, and 2 assistants with a council of 12 companions. It was a school of instruction organized upon a peculiar plan, and the lectures were divided into sections and the sections into clauses. Its teaching embodied the whole art of Masonry. Knight of the Red Cross. A Masonic degree so named is continued in the United States of America. No record of its existence in England can be traced, and if it ever was conferred in this country, it was no doubt one of the many degrees united under that of the Knights Templar. The legend is similar to that of the 15th degree of the ancient and accepted rite. Knight of the Mediterranean Pass was an honorary degree conferred on Knights Templar as Knights of Malta under the old constitution. The degree is said to have originated from the following circumstance. In an excursion of the Knights of Malta into the Kingdom of Naples, while crossing the river Ofanto, the ancient Aufidus, they were attacked by a very superior force of Turks. However, notwithstanding the disparity of numbers, the Knights succeeded in obtaining a complete victory, the Muslims being entirely routed, and the river dyed with their blood. As a reward for the valor displayed by these Knights, they had granted to them free permission to pass and repass at every port in the Mediterranean in possession of the Christians. The legend of the degree relates that this event occurred in 1367, nearly 200 years before the Knights of St. John, or Rhodes as then called, obtained Malta. At this period, the Knights, headed by the Grand Master Raymond Berenger, with a large naval force, attacked the Ottoman corsairs in the Mediterranean and chased them into the port of Alexandria, but were compelled at last to retire before the superior force of the Sultan of Egypt. Knight of Constantinople is a side degree invented in America. We are told it can be conferred by any Master Mason who is possessed of its secrets on another, but there is a ritual for the full performance of the degree, though seldom used. Knights and Nymphs of the Rose was an order of adoptive or androgynous masonry invented towards the close of the 18th century by Monsieur de Chaumont, the Masonic secretary to the Duc de Chartres. The only establishment known was in Paris. The place of meeting was called the Temple of Love. It was ornamented with garlands of flowers and hung round with escutcheons, on which were painted various devices and scenes of gallantry. There were 2 presiding officers, the man being styled the Hierophant, the female the High Priestess. The former initiated men, the latter women. The conductor assistant of the men was called Sentiment, that of the women Discretion. The knights wore a crown of myrtle, the nymphs a crown of roses. The Hierophant and High Priestess wore in addition a rose-colored scarf, on which were embroidered 2 devices within a myrtle wreath. One dull taper was the only light during the initiation. At the closing business, the hall was illuminated by numerous wax candles. When a candidate was to be initiated, he or she was taken in charge by Sentiment or Discretion, divested of all weapons, jewels, or money, hoodwinked and loaded with chains, and conducted to the door of the Temple of Love, where admission was demanded by 2 knocks. When admitted and presented, the candidate was asked his or her name, country, condition in society, and having answered these questions was asked, "What are you now seeking?" To this the answer was, "Happiness." The interrogatory then proceeds a little further. "What is your age?" And the candidate has, if a male, to reply, "The age to love," the female, "The age to please and to be loved." The candidate's feelings and opinions on matters of gallantry are further probed, and all being satisfactory, the chains are removed and replaced by garlands of flowers, which are called the chains of love. After some other probationary exercises of a like character, the OB is administered. I promise and swear by the Grand Master of the universe never to reveal the secrets of the Order of the Rose, and should I fail in this my vow, may the mysteries I shall receive add nothing to my pleasures, and instead of the roses of happiness may I find nothing but thorns of repentance. The candidates were then conducted to the mysterious groves in the neighborhood of the Temple of Love, and during the time there spent, slow and delicious music in march style is played. These trials ended. The novice is next conducted to the altar of mystery, placed at the foot of the Hierophant's throne, and there incense is offered to Venus and her son Cupid, a brief space spent there. And after some more ceremonies of a like character, the bandage is removed from the novitiate's eyes, and with delicious music and in a brilliantly lighted apartment, the signs and secrets are communicated. All the information here given is gathered from Clavel, Maconique Picturesque. Roman Eagle. A Latin lodge was in 1784 organized by Dr. John Brown of Edinburgh under the title of the Roman Eagle Lodge, the whole ritual being in Latin. It had a brief existence. Adoptive Masonry. The Masonry of adoption is the term used in France for a system of masonry for women. It would appear that the perfection of character which their husbands had reached excited a desire in the breasts of some of the other sects to obtain a knowledge of the foundation of Freemasonry. Those who are admitted bear the appellation of sisters. The order contains 5 grades, which are the apprentice, companion, and mistress. These are obligatory. The others are called high grades, high mistress and sublime Scottish. As we might expect, the Garden of Paradise, with our first parents and the tempter, are prominent illustrations, and the dreadful punishment our Mother Eve inflicted on her posterity by giving way to curiosity is the first lesson. Eve is the password throughout, and Basa, Babel, which signifies confusion, is not inappropriate to this mixture of brothers and sisters. The third degree embraces a vast portion of scripture history, the whole of the events recorded in the book of Genesis after the subsidence of the waters of the deluge being brought to view. The prominent vices of both sexes are dilated on, even to a reference to the crimes which drew down the vengeance of the Most High on Sodom, Lot's wife not being forgotten, of course, to read another lesson to the ladies on the evils of curiosity. Joseph's adventures are related in the examination, but the part played by Potiphar's wife appears unaccountably to be omitted, we suppose, because it tells unfavorably to the ladies. Balls and banquets are inseparable from these associations, and they are no doubt the real design of the organization, the ceremonies being merely a pretext. We are told that when first organized in France, the institution was acknowledged by the Masonic authorities of the kingdom. The first lodge, La Candeur, was opened in Paris on the 11th of March, 1785, a marquis being the president, and a duchess acting as Grand Mistress. In the same year, the Duchess of Bourbon was installed as Grand Mistress. The Revolution, of course, checked this as well as other associations, but in 1805 there was a revival, and the Empress Josephine presided over the Lodge Impériale d'Adoption des Francs Chevaliers at Strasbourg. Archigrees, Ark and Dove, and Ark Mariners were degrees in some practice in London during the present century. Their names imply that they have a reference to the salvation of Noah and his family from the deluge. They bore much similitude to the Noahite in the ancient and accepted rite. Masonic baptism. Although we have rites and ceremonies sufficient to task the powers of memory in the best constructed brain, our continental brethren are ever at work to contrive some novelty for the Masonic institution. In France has been instituted an order for the baptism of the sons of Masons, which has been also adopted by the Foyer Masonique Lodge in New Orleans. And the first opening of the proceedings occurred in 1859. The proceedings do not appear to have any very remarkable characteristic. The sponsors make promises of good order and moral conduct, and the neophyte's left hand is dipped into the water by the WM. To the mother is given a gold alliance ring with this injunction: may this ring recall to you as to us your future steps in the Masonic temple. Always remember what you have seen and heard. Henceforth, Masonry can have no secrets for you. You know her laws and obligations. Be then satisfied, dear sister, for this name, which it gives us pleasure to bestow on you, makes us feel that there cannot exist true fraternity and happiness unless accompanied by the presence of woman. The Illuminati. About the year 1775 or 1776, Adam Weishaupt, a professor of canon law in the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, in conjunction with a few other men of high position and intellectual attainments, formed a secret society of a more extraordinary character than modern times had ever known. Of this association, the most extraordinary accounts have been given at various periods, in which the romantic element has combined with malicious exaggeration to distort the few facts which are really known concerning it. We are told that the design of the institution was to accomplish the overthrow of all civil and religious government. The throne and the altar were equally destined to annihilation, and society was to have been completely disorganized. Weishaupt himself is said by the opponents of his system to have been an extreme political reformer and an infidel. But little is known of this person. The meager accounts that we have of him have been written under the influence of strong prejudice, and there is great reason to doubt whether he or the society which he established deserved the bad character which has been attached to them. Freemasonry has been frequently accused of a connection with the much dreaded but little known institution of the Illuminati, and the world at large has been led to believe that the French Revolution and all the horrors that followed were, in a great degree, the result of conspiracies hatched under their united auspices. The idea of connecting his institution with Freemasonry did not exist in Weishaupt's mind at its formation, for it will be seen that the first steps have no Masonic bearing whatever. But it seems that imagining that union with an ancient and honored institution would be favorable to the promulgation of his scheme, he became a member of a lodge in Munich, and in a short time his persuasive arguments induced many Masons to enlist into the new order. He then contrived to interweave the three ancient symbolic degrees with Illuminism, the better by their means to get over the scruples of the more enlightened of those who became his followers. By his adversaries it is said that as soon as the Masons witnessed the development of his high degrees, they saw their error, and one and all retreated, while some who had left the society in disgust at witnessing the disloyal and infidel precepts that were broached, betrayed its principles. Upon learning the political tenets taught in its assemblies, the Elector of Bavaria ordered a judicial examination into the charges made against the order, and the result was that the meetings were forbidden and the society extinguished in his dominions. It, however, spread into other parts of Germany and was introduced into France in 1787. The state of the public feeling in France at this period was favorable to the tenets of an institution like Illuminism, and it made rapid progress. Although Professor Robeson and others have endeavored to connect the Illuminati with Freemasonry, certainly nowhere has it been established that there was ever any specific union or connection with our noble order. Events which occurred in France during the fever of the French Revolution cannot be received in evidence, all society and order having been overturned in that convulsion. It is clear that the institution had but a very brief existence in the country of its birth, and that throughout Germany the Masonic lodges were closed against its founder. Indeed, several dissolved themselves, as it was said lodges might by possibility harbor conspirators, and therefore they must remain closed till quieter times. Weishaupt himself, in recommending his scheme, speaks disparagingly of all Masonry, but says he has contrived a system inviting to Christians of every communion, which gradually frees them from all religious prejudices, and which animates them by a great, a feasible, and speedy prospect of universal happiness. In a state of liberty, free from the obstacles which society, rank, and riches continually throw in our way. Certainly, Freemasonry teaches nothing of this sort. Doctrines even more alarming to the minds of those who reverence the right divine for kings to govern wrong were promulgated in France, and the causes of the revolution may at this day be traced not to such institutions as the Illuminati, but to the deplorable corruption of the national morals and the exhaustion of its resources. The wasteful wars of Louis XIV, his stupendous public works, the splendid edifices erected by him, and the pomp of his magnificent court, although supported by the most oppressive taxation, had at least the effect of flattering the national vanity. But the wanton prodigality of Louis XV produced a different result upon the national mind. The habit of lavishing the public money in profligate expenditure was firmly fixed in the court, and the corrupt system of government too deeply rooted to be easily eradicated. And when Louis XVI ascended the throne, he succeeded to an empty treasury and a debt of 4 millions of livres. The young king's virtuous attempts at reform were opposed by the clergy and noblesse, and at the period of which we are treating, the smouldering fire of public indignation was ready to break into flame. Accounts of an institution holding tenets like those attributed to the Illuminés would naturally increase the alarm of the upper classes, who saw on every hand signs that their days of public plunder were approaching to an end. A work entitled Essai sur la secte des Illuminés, which was published anonymously but has since been ascertained to have been the production of the Marquis de Luchet, made its appearance in the year 1788. And the pretended disclosures which were therein made increased the prevailing excitement. The Illuminati, says our author, began by excluding the New Testament and every reference to Christianity altogether from their lodges. No part of their system, however, from his account, appears to bear the slightest resemblance to symbolic Masonry. The sect had two classes which were subdivided into lesser degrees, their first class containing the following: novices, Illuminatus minor, Illuminatus major. In the second class were attained the mysteries. This was divided into two degrees, lesser and greater. The lesser comprehended the degrees styled priests and regents or princes. In the greater are comprehended those of magus and rex. Between these two classes were afterwards interwoven the three symbolic degrees of Masonry with those of Scotch novice and Scotch knight. From the last class were chosen the elect, who were the Supreme Council and the Areopagites. The operations of the sect depended in every degree on the tact of one single brother, designated the Brother Inquisitor, whose office was to make proselytes and to prepare the minds of the newly initiated for the part they were intended to act. It has been said that Illuminism found its way into Britain, but the statement is without foundation, and there is no record of any one of our countrymen having embraced its principles. As all we know of the institution is derived from hostile writers, it is quite possible that Illuminism is wrongly judged. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.